The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik. I will be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast, and I am, of course, co-founder of Financing Solutions. And for those of you who don't know Financing Solutions, we are the leading provider in the United States of lines of credit for small nonprofits. Yes, there is a company that specializes in lines of credit for you. And if you're interested in learning more to get a simple offer letter to see how much you qualify for, please visit us at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. We actually have the founder as our guest today of the company that sponsors the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and that is the company that sponsors it is Araize. Araize's Fast Fund Online is a cloud-based system that seamlessly integrates nonprofit accounting software, fund accounting, fundraising, and payroll in a single solution. It's designed by CPAs. Fast Fund Online is helping nonprofits be more accountable, transparent, and provides proper stewardship of donor funds. I'm a big proponent. I've been having my own businesses for 30 years. I think finding software that specializes in your industry is just smart. And a lot of people use QuickBooks, and, you try to make it work, and he's, really does a great job with this type of accounting software for nonprofits that are smaller or bigger. So if you want to visit their website, it's araize.com. It's ARAIZE.com, or call 847-261-9605. So today's topic, of course, we're going to pick the expert's brain. It's Joe Scarano, and Joe has been the CEO of Araize, and Joe has 10 years of experience as a CPA in a public accounting firm, and he specializes in auditing and consulting with nonprofits. With 36 years of experience providing software solutions to nonprofits, Joe is dedicated to helping nonprofits be more accountable and more sustainable so they can better fulfill their mission. Joe, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thank you, Steve, and happy 2023 to everyone.
Yep. Yeah, so it's January 10th as the recording of this date. So we're all trying to pick up the pieces from our holidays and trying to get motivated to get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I asked Joe to come back every month now because I really liked his last two podcasts that he did with us as the industry expert when it comes to financial areas. And today he's going to be talking about how to pick the best nonprofit accounting software. And so, Joe, tell me a little bit before we kind of get a little bit more deeper into this topic. Why did you kind of get into building Araize?
Well, I'm a CPA by education and in trade for a while. Excuse me. I was licensed in the state of New York as a CPA, and the firm I worked for, the majority of our clients were nonprofits. We did audits for them. We did their accounting. We did consulting and bookkeeping. So it was from that experience that we developed our accounting for nonprofits. So I hate to date myself, but the company that preceded Araize was called IDS. It was based in New York. IDS became Araize in the 90s. But back in those days, when PCs were just being introduced in the early 80s, my partner at the time thought it would be a great idea to develop accounting software for our clients, since there really wasn't any good solutions in the nonprofit accounting field at that time. Right at that time, there were some new accounting applications being developed and marketed to small businesses, but there really wasn't a good option for nonprofits. So we started the company in the early 80s and were moderately successful. I actually took a little bit of a sabbatical from the accounting and industry for a while, but then came back in the late 90s. And that's when IDS merged with another company and became Araize, and in 1997 I became the CEO. So it's been kind of ingrained in my blood. I mean, almost my whole work career has been working in accounting and in nonprofits. So our Fast Fund Online system, we feel that it is a very affordable, comprehensive solution that handles the accounting, donor management, and payroll needs for most nonprofits. Our clients range in size from real small, less than $50,000 a year in gross revenue, and they only have to file a 990 postcard with the IRS, up to, I believe, our largest client is around 20 million in revenue. We have some quasi-governmental agencies that are they're like nonprofit, but they're government run, so they have to follow the same accounting principles. So I believe, again, our Fast Fund system is designed to meet most nonprofits' accounting needs.
So QuickBooks, I would assume, is one of the largest accounting softwares that nonprofits use. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'd say QuickBooks is the most popular accounting application in all businesses.
Yes, right.
They started out as a glorious checkbook, a product called Quicken, and it was basically designed to help manage your personal finances. And that Quicken application grew into QuickBooks, and it is the most popular application out there. There's QuickBooks Desktop, which Intuit is slowly trying to sunset and move everyone into the subscription model, which is the online version, which most software companies are now moving in that direction. But it's a great package for a business. It's pretty comprehensive. The biggest problem is it does not do nonprofit accounting. You mentioned it earlier that while it will do your basic accounting, you can record your receipts, you can record your expenses and disbursements, generate income statements and balance sheets. But when it comes to proper nonprofit reporting, no matter how you slice and dice it and try to manipulate QuickBooks to do proper reporting, it's just not designed to do it. Intuit actually has a vertical application called QuickBooks for nonprofits. And essentially, the only difference between the regular version of QuickBooks and QuickBooks for nonprofits is sales receipts are called pledge receipts and clients are called donors. Other than that, it is exactly the same application.
Tell me, when you're being just generic, looking at all different types of accounting software for nonprofits, what the number one thing we mentioned is that accounting software for any industry it's much better if it's verticalized, if it's if in this case, if it's for nonprofits. So that would be a key thing. What else would you say is really important?
The first thing is, when you take a look at a off-the-shelf accounting application, they have basic accounting principles. At the end of your fiscal year, at the end of your accounting year, your profit or loss is rolled into your owner's equity. So the majority of off-the-shelf accounting applications only have a single owner's equity account where the profit and loss is rolled into the next fiscal year. In the nonprofit world, depending on how the organization has set up their books, there might be multiple closing entry for each of their funds. So in the nonprofit world, a fund is like having a separate company within your company. When you have to report, if you want to be GAAP compliant, generally accepted accounting principles compliant, your financial statements have to reflect two different classes of what are referred to as net assets or funds, which is equal to owner's equity. And that is without donor designations, meaning all of the revenue received has no strings attached. So it has without donor designations. And then with donor designations means revenue that you received that has a specific purpose. So there are strings attached. So that's the number one thing that a off-the-shelf commercial accounting application cannot do. It does not give you the ability to have multiple year-end closing entries. So any nonprofit that's using a package like QuickBooks has to manually calculate that amount. And so it creates a lot of extra work, and potentially, again, depending on the size of the organization, if they have an annual audit, it just makes the audit a little bit more difficult.
Is QuickBooks good with manual audits, manual entries?
Sure. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can enter your receipts and disbursements, and schedule checks to be printed. Yeah, so it's really QuickBooks is a very powerful tool. I mean, Intuit's been around for a long time. They've invested a lot of R&D in making the product better, and is if I was a regular business, which I am, but most regular businesses could do very well with QuickBooks. What really separates accounting applications for vertical markets is, besides your basic accounting, what does your business do, and how does your accounting software integrate with other third-party applications required for your business, whether it's billing. So if you're a services firm and you have to do a lot of billing, you want to make sure you have software that can accommodate billing, for all of your employees out to your clients. In the nonprofit world, it's managing, on the accounting side, managing grants, your grant receivables and grant reporting, being able to generate grant budgets and grant budget to actual reports. There's also, in some nonprofits, the need to allocate costs. And what I mean by that is, some funding sources for nonprofits will reimburse the nonprofit for indirect costs. So their management in general expenses, which is another unique characteristic of nonprofits, is where all of your expenses have to be broken down by what are referred to as three functional areas. There's your mission-based program, your support services, which is management in general, and fundraising. So some grantors will allow nonprofits to charge a portion of their administrative costs to the grant as an indirect cost. So there are applications that can accommodate that, where you don't have to do a data dump into a spreadsheet in Excel to calculate your indirect cost reimbursements. And then finally, there's managing your fundraising. So you don't treat a donation or charitable gift or fundraising event revenue as a regular cash receipt, because you need to segregate your contributions received from your donors to enable you to recognize and send out donor receipts to the donors, separate the receipts from program service revenue and other revenue. And then when you do your 990, your charitable contributions also have to be segregated from your other revenue, which could be grant revenue or program service revenue. So there's a lot of different things that nonprofits have to do that other businesses don't.
So let's just look at it from a generic standpoint, and that is independent of Araize. If you were working for a nonprofit right now and you're the executive director and you said, yes, I got to get some new software, tell me the things that you would specifically look for, what questions or things that you would look for if you're speaking to the vendors.
Well, first thing is, as the executive director of the nonprofit, let's say the nonprofit is large enough that they have to file a 990. A full 990 that means their revenue is over $250,000 a year. So the first thing that you have to, the first thing that the software product has to do for you, your application that you're looking to evaluate, is it has to have the ability to segregate all of your revenue by donor designation. Is it designated for a specific purpose, or is it revenue that has no strings attached? And then when you record all your expenses, you have to be able to break down those expenses at a minimum by one category of, whether it's a program-based expense, or a management general or fundraising expense. Now, some nonprofits have multiple programs, so they might have a food pantry or a homeless shelter or a counseling center. So each one of those are different programs. And then depending on your funding sources, are you receiving government funding or private foundation funding, grants? Some grantors require that you track how you spend each dollar associated with that grant. So you have to have a subset under your program to break out your multiple grants or funding sources. So there could be 3 or 4 layers of reporting when you record your transaction.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying is when you're speaking to various accounting software companies for nonprofits, you need to ask them very specific questions about the things that you weren't able to do before.
Mm-hmm.
And say, how do you handle that now? How do you handle this now? How do you handle that now? And
Mm-hmm.
they better have an answer for every single one. I'm just curious, when you're trying to do some of that stuff with QuickBooks and you call them, what's do they usually have a workaround? I'm assuming they have a workaround.
Well, QuickBooks, the nonprofits that we speak to that are interested in Araize, they're typically using what QuickBooks calls classes. Other applications might call them tags to enable them to track an expense. So let's say you have a telephone expense. For a business, it goes into one bucket, telephone. Of course, if a business has multiple locations, they're tracking by location. So you need a little bit more sophisticated software. So you need to be able to say, okay, I'm paying this telephone bill and X percent goes to management in general, another X percent goes to fundraising, and then the balance gets split to our multiple programs. So when you record that $1,000 payment for your telephone bill, you have to be able to split it. So with QuickBooks, you could use classes to do that, which is fine. But then if you need a subset underneath the class by grant code or location code, then QuickBooks falls short because it only gives you one layer of reporting underneath the line item expense, and that's the class.
Gotcha.
So it could do it, and if you're not that complicated in terms of your funding and your reporting requirements, and if you don't require an audit, then QuickBooks could work.
So ask them. Okay, so the first thing was ask them, like what we said, ask them specific questions in regards to the things that you have problems with the existing software and see how they do it, right? Mm-hmm. What's the second thing that if you're looking at other accounting software that you should look at?
Well, when you're buying software, obviously you're investing in learning the software, making sure that your staff is on board and making that transition to the new software. And it's not a single purchase. You're creating a hopefully lifetime relationship with the software vendor because you need support. There's no software package that you're going to install and not require some help getting it set up. And because nonprofit accounting is more complicated than for-profit accounting, you want to make sure that the software vendor or the consultants that are working for the software vendor understand nonprofit accounting, understand the complexities of how it should be set up for your organization to make sure that management for the nonprofit is able to generate the proper financial reporting that gives them the information they need to measure their programs' sustainability. A nonprofit needs to know if they're running multiple programs, are we bringing in enough revenue to cover our expenses for the program so it's sustainable? A nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make a profit. It just means you're not taxed on your profits. A successful nonprofit should have a large reserve for for months or years where they don't, might have a little bit of a drain on their resources. So it's really the ability to manage their programs, measure to make sure the programs are running at a sustainable level, and being able to plan for future growth and future changes and potential funding and funding sources.
I got a crazy question for you. It just came to my mind. I never really thought of it before. But let's say a nonprofit owns a building, mm-hmm. And in a for-profit business, you depreciate that building.
Right.
Now you do it because there's a tax benefit behind that. But do you depreciate a building for a nonprofit?
Sure.
Why?
Only because you don't want to expense the entire cost of the building in 1 year. I mean, it is a depreciable expense that also is an investment.
Gotcha.
So, the building is going to appreciate. And so you want to make sure that the book value of the asset shows. I mean, it's an asset. So if you expense it, it's not going to show up as an asset. That's
Gotcha.
number one. If you have $1 million building and you
Yep.
expense it, it's not going to show up on your balance sheet.
Yeah.
But it is an asset. It's an appreciable asset.
So the first one we said was ask specific questions about how they do certain things. The second one was support. Make sure they have the customer support there. That's going to speak specifically, let's face it, to nonprofits. What would be the third one?
Well, I mentioned the ability to integrate with other applications. So for a lot of nonprofits, they rely on donations as their sole source of revenue. So they want to make sure that they have in place a CRM, client relationship management. We call it a constituent relationship management for their donors and volunteers and board members. Making sure that they're able to reach out to those constituents and donors, solicit donations, market the nonprofit. If they have any kind of fundraising event, being able to track who attended the event and send out receipts to their donors and thanking them for the donations and just making sure that the nonprofit is making the donor aware how thankful they are for their donations. And that ties into accounting too, because, in a system like QuickBooks, you could have someone who maybe you're providing them some sort of service. And so you might get revenue from John Smith for a service that you're providing. That revenue coming from John Smith is not a charitable contribution. A school is a perfect example. You have a nonprofit school where parents are paying tuition for their children. So the nonprofit has to track revenue coming in from the families that their kids are attending the school. And the tuition is not a charitable gift, even though the school is nonprofit. But if the parents turn around and make a donation to the school, that is a charitable contribution. So the accounting software has to give the fiscal directors, the nonprofit, the ability to segregate types of revenue. This is a tuition revenue, room and board, everything related to the services they provide as a school, and then be able to segregate the donations that came in from the families or anyone else who's making a donation. And a product like QuickBooks cannot do that. Everything comes in as a sales receipt or donor receipt, whatever they call it, if it's a nonprofit version.
So the third one would be that we talked about was integration with other software. So fourth one, I think, could be, from my experience with other software, is transitioning. So usually, how are we going to get the data? It's in what we have. How are we going to set up the new system? Mm-hmm. What's your setup procedure like? How do you help us do that? How do you do that for us? Is that accurate to say?
Yes. Depending on the nonprofit and what system they're coming from, some organizations will want to convert a certain number of years of data. Other organizations want a clean slate because whatever they were using prior to making that transition to a new system is not reliable. So it's difficult to convert something that they don't really know if what they're converting is accurate. And so they might have a cutoff. If their fiscal year ends in December, they start the new system in January and finish up their old fiscal year in the old system and basically just shut it down and then start fresh with a new system. Then, of course, if you want a data conversion, you have to make sure that the old system can export the data that you need to convert. There's always going to be a field mapping of all the data from the old system needs to map into the data fields in the new system. And when you're working with a product like QuickBooks, moving to a nonprofit accounting system, regardless of what it is, you're moving from what's referred to as a flat chart of accounts, where you have a telephone expense, a rent expense, a utility expense, and then you have to convert that to the new system where that telephone expense is broken down into 4 categories, the rent expense broken down into however many different categories. So if the old system did not properly classify those expenses, then it would be difficult to convert. I mean, you can convert it as a single line, but it really would be meaningless in the new system if it's not broken down by the proper functional area.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience going with different softwares and not accounting, this type of accounting software, but like I remember for a CRM system, we were using Microsoft Dynamics, which now is I forget what they call it now. So it was a very, very, just like QuickBooks, kind of built for everybody, right? And then then we switched to a company called Velocify, which is software that's specifically built for our industry. And what I was really amazed with was like the amount of knowledge that they knew in that vertical market that we needed, like the amount of, how you set things up. And so when we moved from Microsoft Dynamics to Velocify, it was like they knew exactly our business. And I would say our business got so much better, instantly. And that happened to me a number of times where we went from one software to another, and how that had such a huge effect on our ability to be able to get things done. It's just unbelievable. I mean, I would say the one thing, there are times when you say is, oh yeah, well, I used to do it this way and it was so much better. And then you go to the new system, you're like, oh, it's so much more complicated. And then after a while, after you start working with the new software, you're like, oh, I get why they did what they did. Oh, it's because it affects all these other areas.
Exactly.
And so I mean, I'm a big proponent of going with an industry specific software.
I talk to accountants all the time, and a lot of them say, well, QuickBooks works. There's no problem with using QuickBooks. And I query them. So how do you get the proper financial reports? Oh, well, we dump it into Excel, and, we've got macros and it does everything you want. And so my answer to that is, wouldn't it be easier, instead of dumping it into Excel and creating your macros and generating your reports, if the software you're using has everything you need to generate the reports? And, of course, they can't answer, no, it's not easier, but lots of times they're stuck in their ways. And, they know QuickBooks and they don't want to deal with having to learn a new system. And I always draw the analogy of, if I had to cut my front lawn and it was, 10 by 10, I could use a small push mower and I'd get the job done. But if I was trying to mow, the fifth fairway around the corner, par 5, 490 yard fairway with my little push mower, it's going to take me a lot longer. So it's all about using the proper tools.
Yeah, you do get set in your ways where you're like, you just don't know how much easier it could be, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And I think that really changes that. I have never made a switch from one software to another that's verticalized, that I studied and I say, this is what I want, and not been thrilled with the change.
Well, it is an investment in time. Obviously you need to learn the new system, but when you do make the switch, and if you're committed to make the switch, it does make everyone's life a lot easier, because they could very easily generate, reports on each of their programs, prepare for their audits, do grant reporting, and overall it just makes, their jobs easier because they have better tools.
Yeah. We have just a couple of minutes left. Is there any last thoughts that you have on kind of looking at software?
Yeah. Before we connected, Steve, I went online and just Googled best accounting software for nonprofits. And you really need to be careful with the results that you get, because I'd say 3 out of 4 of the sites that I visited every application except for maybe one or two were generic software packages. QuickBooks, Xero, FreshBooks, they're all really good accounting systems, but they don't have any nonprofit capability. So if you are looking for nonprofit specific accounting software, you want to try to fight through the noise and focus on a company, whether it's Araize, whether it's Blackbaud or Abilla or AccuFund or MIP, well, MIP and Abilla are the same thing. But there are a lot of companies out there that's their primary focus, accounting software for nonprofits. So, a lot of them have similar capabilities as Araize's Fast Fund. Some of them are a little less sophisticated. Some of them are a little bit more sophisticated, but you really want to focus on accounting software that has nonprofit functionality, not any off-the-shelf package that they try to manipulate and get nonprofit reports or nonprofit accounting out of it.
Yeah, my advice too would be two things. One, when you go to your trade shows, a lot of times there's accounting software companies there. Number three is look at three companies. Speak to three companies.
Yeah, you definitely want to do some comparison. And of course, check references.
Excuse me, I just sneezed. Very good. Well, listen, that's all the time we have today. And I'd like to thank so very much Joe Scarano from Araize, Raize, for coming on to today's podcast. And of course, Araize happens to be the sponsor of our podcast too. But, again, Joe's the expert. So that's why I kind of asked him to come on and talk about this. And if you're interested, please go to Araize, Araize.com to learn more about Joe's company's product. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to give us a review on your podcasting app to help us get the word out. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your organization, you can call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Joe, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Well, the best thing to do is go to our website, araize.com, or they can send an email to sales@araize.com, and I'd love to be able to help them out.
Well, good job today, Joe.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Yep. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I want to wish everybody a very happy, healthy new year.